central banks are buying more gold than any time in history right now.
Yep.
Why is that? Well, one, they're old. Gold's been around forever. It also has to do with the way that the BIS calculates gold per Basel agreements, things like that. And so, to the point that you're making, it's taking less gold today to buy the home in gold terms. In dollars, it takes more dollars.
Way more.
Right?
Yep. All right, guys. Today we're diving into a conversation I've wanted to have for a long time. There are very few people who can take something as complex as monetary history, currency cycles, the rise and fall of empires, and explain it in a way that actually makes sense. And that's why I wanted my guest, Mark Moss, on the channel today. You know, over the last several years, I've personally learned a ton about why it's so important to have wealth outside the traditional banking system from Mark. And we might disagree in a few spots. He's a Bitcoin guy, I'm a gold guy, but ultimately we have the same concerns about the future. And I've truly learned a lot from his YouTube channel. So his channel will be linked down below, as well as some other resources that Mark offers that go into how to position yourself for the monetary shifts that we'll be talking about today. So Mark, it's great to have you here.
Yeah, good to be here. Thank you for that nice introduction. I would say I don't think we probably disagree hardly at all. If anything, I bet if we actually dug into it. But anyway, let's talk about it.
Cool. Well, I want to open up with one of my favorite videos of yours, which is a video where you explain how inflation is literally theft of our time and resources. And you compared it to how in the 1750s, Africans used cowrie shells as money because they were finite, they worked well, and Europeans saw this. They brought over boatloads of these shells, effectively counterfeit money, and they bought up all their land and resources and turned them into slaves. So, two questions. One, can you explain that a little bit further in depth for our listeners? And two, is that what you see the Federal Reserve is doing right now? Are they printing money out of thin air, giving it to BlackRock, pricing the average American out from buying a home and, inflating the price of everything? What does this really mean?
So I think first off, let's just talk about what you said about literally stealing your life. So we have to get a little philosophical. And in order to understand these things, it takes more than just one subject. If you really want to understand them deeply, you have to understand them from many different subjects. And so if we jump into the philosophical level for a second, the law of thermodynamics states that energy cannot be created. Energy only transfers. So a lot of people don't know this, but thinking requires a lot of energy. It burns energy in your body. Calories is why your body doesn't like to think. It's too hard work. Your body wants to turn everything into habits. So we do things on a pre-programmed track. We're not thinking. Obviously, moving, working expends energy. So we have to get energy in our body to expend the energy. We can't create the energy, and we do it through calories, right? And so if we think about this, it's like, so then I bring in calories, and then my body can use that energy doing other things. Now, I would spend that energy doing a task or resource providing value to somebody. They would give me something else back that I need in exchange, milk or eggs or chicken. Today we get money, so I can then go exchange that in the marketplace. So what happens is, let's just say that I'm spending 8 hours a day, or let's say that I'm spending about 4 hours a day doing a task, digging a hole. And I can earn enough back to feed me and my family for the day. So every day I work 4 hours, I go home, I get some chicken, I get some eggs, and I can feed myself for the day. But let's just say, well, shoot, today I think I might work 8 hours. So I'm gonna work an extra 4 hours. I've spent more energy working, but then what do I do with that extra energy? Well, we can put that into money. And then money is like stored energy that allows me to then tomorrow not have to work the 4 hours. I could now use the stored energy in the money for tomorrow's work. And what happens is when the government, central bank, prints more money, as I said, they're literally stealing our life. That's our life's energy. Our life's energy, like a battery, is stored in that. And so when they do inflation, it makes our energy, it steals the value of our energy, or our energy leaks out of that battery, so it buys us less. So now, instead of having to work 4 hours tomorrow, because I have 4 hours of stored energy, I gotta work 6. So now I have to work 2 more hours tomorrow because they took 2 from me. Now let's put this into some real numbers. A lot of people remember it wasn't that long ago under President Biden back in 2021, inflation hit 9%, and that's CPI. The government's reported CPI number, consumer price inflation, 9%. What does that mean? That means for the average person making about $30 an hour, they would have to work 10 more hours per month to have the exact same buying power they had the month before. 10 extra hours. 10 hours that they could have spent on starting a side business, 10 hours they could have spent with their kids, 10 hours they could have spent on their health, in their relationships, however you want to put it. But instead of me being able to put those 10 hours of my life in a place that benefits me, I now have to work those extra 10 hours just to have the same quality of life that I had before. So that's what I mean, stealing my life, literally meaning I have to go work more hours to pay for the government's theft of my money. Now, going back to the cowrie shells, what happens is a simple truth is that if I have to work for money that somebody else can just print from thin air, then I'm a slave. I have to expend my life's energy, my effort, my labor, and they just print the money. And so that's sort of like what happened in Africa, right? They're working really hard to get these really scarce beads and using those as money. And then the Europeans could just bring in boatloads of them from other locations that they could get very cheaply. And so then they were able to just come in and just basically buy all this labor. And it's no different than what we have today. We've seen the nations around the world, the BRICS nations, China, Russia, Brazil, et cetera. And China has said so much. It's like, the United States is able to print a $100 bill for pennies, but then they are able to take $100 of labor from somebody else across the ocean. And so we see this all the time. And this is not just about fiat money, by the way. As a gold bug, maybe you've done your history and you understand gold and silver as money, and you understand in the 14 and 1500s, Spain went on a conquest to go find more silver. They find massive reserves of silver in the mountains of Peru, and they bring all that silver back with them. Well, that made them extremely rich at first, and then it pushed them into massive inflation, exorbitant inflation, where nobody could afford anything until the economy crashed. So anytime you increase the money supply faster than the productivity goes up, you have this problem. Doesn't matter if it's a sound money like gold or silver, or it's fiat money, you can't increase the money supply that fast. The real rate of inflation is the rate that the money supply is expanding. Like a balloon, if I inflate a balloon, I'm increasing the volume of air. And so monetary inflation is the increase of money supply. And if you look back since 2019, we've seen the money supply, USM2, go up by about 10% per year. That's the real rate of debasement. That's the real rate of inflation. And that's the real number that we have to beat. And so when you look at like the S&P 500 measured in gold, measured in a basket of commodities, you'll see that it's down since 2000. Right? So the S&P 500 is not really keeping up. It's sort of like a perfect proxy for inflation. The average median U.S. home is a perfect proxy for inflation. And so then we have to find something that we can get into that can actually beat that inflation for us.
Okay. So like with gold, for example, in 1971, just to use that year as a milestone, it was like 1,000 ounces of gold to buy a home. In America. Now it's like 150 ounces of gold to buy a home in America. So the same thing, basically, just to give people an idea of what that means. With Bitcoin, it's probably astronomically less Bitcoin now than even 9 years or 10 years ago to buy the average home in America. It takes a lot less Bitcoin now than it took before, right?
Yeah. I mean, and that's exactly how people should be looking at it, which is purchasing power. So it's really important to understand this, because what happens is the world prices things in dollars. That's the unit of account. But that so there's a denominator and a denominator, right? And the problem is the denominator, the dollars, is constantly being manipulated. So we have no way to really measure our wealth or measure our purchasing power. And so to the point that you're making, it's taking less gold today to buy the home. In gold terms, in dollars, it takes more dollars. Way more. Right? Yep. And it's important to understand that for a couple of reasons. So like, for example, in 2008, you saw the S&P 500 drop about 60%. Gold dropped about 35%. So gold also sold off. Gold's not a good store of value. Yes, it went down in dollars terms, but it actually went up in purchasing power.
Right.
right? And so again, if you're only looking at things in dollar terms, you're missing what's really going on. And so even though gold also dropped with the S&P 500, gold would buy way more S&P 500 at that time, more houses at the time, and more things like that. So yeah, that's some of the ways that they're sort of being misrepresented. And I think it's just important that people can understand that nowadays we have the benefit of having several calculators that can sort of help us calculate things in different assets like gold or Bitcoin, but even oil or oranges or tons of rice. You can see that manipulation.
They've all done better than fiat. So, you've long talked about self-directed IRAs. I've helped tons of clients buy gold inside of their self-directed IRAs. My dad has a self-directed IRA. People on my team have self-directed IRAs. What are these accounts for people that don't know? And how can they use them to buy Bitcoin and buy gold in their retirement account? Why would that be a better option than traditional account, like with stocks or bonds?
Yeah, so, this is something I talk about quite a bit, where revenue is what you earn, but wealth is what's engineered. So we see today, I believe it's 40% of people in the United States making over $200,000 a year living paycheck to paycheck.
Wow.
So it's not about the amount of money that you make. That's the revenue. That's a raw asset that you bring in. But how do I engineer wealth? And when we play the game of wealth, which is certainly not our highest calling in the world, but in that game of trying to build wealth and engineering that, we have to understand the game that we're even playing. So if I came to your house and I said, let's play a game, and I brought a game that you'd never played before, you'd be like, well, what's the objective of the game? What are the rules of the game? What's the mechanism of the game, et cetera? You might also believe that if I've been playing this game for a long time, I have some strategies and tips, tricks up my sleeve that you don't know about. But in this game of wealth, we have to understand that, sort of like most games, there's penalties that we have to watch out for. So one of which is taxes, and one of which is inflation. So as we're trying to build our wealth in this game, we have taxes and we have inflation that keeps trying to steal our wealth in that game, right? And so we have to figure out ways that we can get around that. And so a lot of people have probably heard, Warren Buffett saying he pays less taxes than his secretary, or Robert Kiyosaki talking about he doesn't pay taxes, or Trump, they want to Trump's tax returns because he didn't pay taxes. And so the wealthy don't pay a lot of income taxes. There's a bunch of other taxes they pay. And that's because they do things to offset those taxes. One of which we can use like an IRA account like you're talking about. So there's an IRA or a Roth IRA that we could use. And those have, they're different wrappers that give me different tax treatment. So an IRA, for example, would go into tax deferred. So let's say that I make $100,000, I could put $10,000 into that account and I don't pay tax on that. So now I'm only paying tax on $90,000 of income instead of the 100. So I'm deferring the tax. A Roth IRA would be after I've already paid the tax, I could put the asset in there. And when I get it out later, there is no tax later. And I think it's important to understand what those two things are, and then understand, or I guess make your assumption of where you think things are in the future. When you look at the governments, especially the United States, currently we're spending over $2 trillion more per year than the revenue that comes in, and the revenue is at an all-time high. There's zero appetite to cut the spending, as we've seen. Elon Musk came in all fired up with Doge, and he's going to reduce government spending. That ended. As a matter of fact, now Doge is officially shut down. That's not happening. And we also have to understand that as of today, the interest on the debt is now the third largest outlay on the government books. So even if whatever, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years from now, even if Doge got resurrected and we are gonna cut, well, I guess we have to cut the defense, and I guess we have to cut Social Security and Medicaid. You can't cut the interest on the debt. You got to pay the interest. So this can't get paid. And so when you start to understand that, you realize the inevitability of the government continue to get deeper and deeper in debt and further behind on the interest. And so in my opinion, that probably means higher taxes in the future. So the question is, would I rather pay the taxes today and get the growth tax-free in the future, or put the assets in tax deferred now and pay tax later? So if I buy, again, with gold, I don't know how long it's going to be till you retire, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, but let's say that you put money in tax deferred, you had $10,000. After taxes, you have $7,000 to put into gold. It goes into a Roth IRA. But let's say in 30 years from now, gold's $30,000 an ounce. I get all that tax free.
Right.
Versus I can, instead of $7,000 after taxes, I can put $10,000 in tax deferred today. But now all of a sudden, when it's 30,000 an ounce, I got to pay tax on that whole gain, which is probably higher than the amount is today. And so I think it's important to understand that. Understand where you think things will be with taxes. Understand where you think the gold price will be at the point when you get to that point where you want to pull that money out, and then choose the right vehicle. But certainly, using these types of vehicles is very, very important to grow your wealth.
Yeah, and I personally don't own any gold inside of a retirement account. I know and have a lot of clients that do, and it's because they already had existing money that was in a Roth IRA or a traditional IRA, and they wanted more options, and they had the option to then go buy Bitcoin or gold or other alternatives within their self-directed IRA. Now, you've made a ton of really good videos explaining central banks stockpiling gold. And I wanted to show you these headlines that just came out, looks like 19 days ago. The Czech Central Bank becomes the first central bank to buy Bitcoin. And they bought $1 million of digital assets, mostly made up of Bitcoin. And so Jack Mallers, who you're probably familiar with,
of course,
he's the founder of Strike. He says that banks and hedge funds look at Bitcoin like a sick trade, and they don't look at it like you look at it and he looks at it. They're like, it's a sick trade for my sick hedge fund. And I agree with him in that I don't think we should even pay attention to what the hedge funds and banks are saying, but what central banks are doing. And central banks, they're buying gold. They have been for years, and now they're starting to buy Bitcoin. And I'd like to hear your thoughts on why you think so few central banks right now own Bitcoin. If you think the Jekyll Island creatures behind the scenes that run the Fed, they own Bitcoin in their own private wallets, or I'm just trying to understand why you're a Bitcoin guy and not a gold guy. Because when I get to the end of a lot of your videos, I think I should go and buy gold, not I should go and buy Bitcoin. And it might just because I have more trust in gold and I've done more research on gold, but I'm just really curious because I've learned a lot about just currency cycles in general. Why are you more a Bitcoiner over gold? Why do you choose Bitcoin over gold?
Yeah. Well, as you said, and a lot of times when you watch my videos and you want to go buy more gold, and that's usually I'm throwing out buy Bitcoin or gold. And the reason why is because after 2008, I had started multiple businesses, had multiple big exits, Fortune 500 exits in tech companies. I started tech companies. I sold tech companies. So that kind of gives you a little bit of background. I'm a technology guy. Then I sold sold a couple of businesses, put it all in the real estate, got smashed in 2008. Had to go figure all this out. And I'd been really good in business. I wasn't paying attention to this global macroeconomic system that we had. And as I started trying to figure this out so I could protect myself and my family from that happening again to me, I started learning about fiat currency. I started learning about money printing. I started learning about leverage in the banking system being built up. And I quickly realized that fiat is the problem and that gold was the solution. And so I became a gold bug. And I started buying a lot of gold, and I still own some gold today. But once I got into Bitcoin, I realized that I wasn't a gold bug. What I was is a sound money advocate. That's what I was. And what I would say is that both of those work. I can ride a bike to my house, or I could hop in my car and go to my house, right? We can get to my house either way. It's just route would take. And what I would say is, first, let's go back to the question that you asked about why are central banks they're still buying gold, not really buying Bitcoin yet. And then why am I a Bitcoiner? And so I'd say is that Peter Schiff, a gold guy that loves to just hammer on Bitcoin, I went and spoke at his mastermind in Mexico City about a year and a half ago. And him and I had to go outside, and we had this big crowd around us, and we sort of debated. And where we ended up with, at the end of all of it, was, but Bitcoin's only been around 15 years, and gold's been around 5,000.
Yeah.
And so that is the argument that is left for gold bugs to make. And there's no defeating that. You're absolutely right. Gold has been money for 5,000 years. Bitcoin's only been around 15. And there's just no way around that. But the answer to that, my answer to that is, but candles were also light for 5,000 years before electricity.
Yeah.
Right? We used to send letters in the mail for 100 years before the internet. And so things change. And so I get that. And there's the Lindy effect. And the longer something's been around, the more likely it is to be around.
Yeah.
And I'm certainly not saying that gold is going away. I recognize, I talk about it in my videos all the time, that central banks are buying more gold than any time in history right now.
Yep.
Why is that? Well, one, they're old. Gold's been around forever. It also has to do with the way that the BIS calculates gold per Basel agreements, things like that. I would also say that maybe there are more central banks buying Bitcoin that we don't know about.
Yeah.
We certainly know that China's buying all types of gold that they're not telling the world about. And so we don't expect a lot of transparency from that. But I think those are the reasons why eventually they'll get there. But like, you don't just take a new speculative asset that's highly technical that most people can't even understand and expect central banks to start putting the reserve assets into it in 15 years. That'd be kind of crazy in my opinion. But as I like to say, the future is not evenly distributed. And so, for those that believed in Amazon early, they benefited. For those that believed in Google, benefited. For those that believed in Uber and Airbnb, early, benefited. And so at some point, we have to understand that technology changes things. It changes the way that we work and evolve and adapt, and the different tools that we have. And Bitcoin is that today. And so I believe that Bitcoin will take the place of gold. I believe it has all the attributes of gold, and then it makes up for the shortcomings. And so we'll get there eventually, but yeah, probably not for a long time.
Do you think central banks play a role in the future? Will there be like central bank digital currencies, or do you think that Bitcoin is the end-all, be-all currency that we all use?
Yeah, again, over what time frame? So, I would say that central banks, the dollar itself, the central banks, central bank currencies will probably be around for a long time. When I say a long time, 25 to 50 years. And I think they do eventually go obsolete. You see, the whole... First of all, what is even a bank, and then what is even a central bank? Why do we even have it? What is the need for it? What use do they have, right? So number one, what does a bank do? Really, there's three main things a bank does. Number one, and they were needed for gold, they store your money for you. So they store your money, they handle payments, incoming and outgoing payments, and they provide credit. Three things. And with gold, because gold is slow and heavy and physical, if I wanted to pay you or I wanted to pay someone overseas, it's very hard for me to get my gold to that person overseas. So in the 1500s in Italy, in Florence, Italy, we invented a new piece of technology called the ledger. And then the gold could go in the bank, and then they could just use the ledger and double entry accounting to then manage the credits of the ledger while they held the gold. And we got the paper IOUs and the certificates, gold certificates, et cetera. And so gold requires that intermediary to do that. And then the banking system was built up around that. But Bitcoin doesn't require someone else to store it for me. I can just store it myself. It doesn't require an intermediary to manage the ledger or to send and receive payments for me. I can just do that myself. So it obsoletes the bank. Now the bank also provides credit, but now there's a lot of other lending institutions that have popped up outside of banks. Now, what does a central bank do? Well, the central bank manages the supply of money.
Yeah.
Now, as we've already talked about, as we started out, whenever somebody can print money that I have to spend my labor on, it's theft, it's stealing my life. I believe it's immoral. I believe it's wrong. I'm sure you've seen the charts. If you look at the volatility, supposedly what the central bank is supposed to do is save us from the boom and bust. But if you look at a chart of volatility of booms and busts since the creation of the Fed in 1913, it only continues to get more and more exaggerated. And so they're not doing that. All they do, it's like if I carried 5 books in my hand, I can sort of manage it. If I had 500 books, I could barely manage it. And so as the balance sheets get bigger, the booms and busts, the swings get larger, the amount of stimulus that's required continues to get larger. And so I don't think that on a sound money standard, there's a need for a central bank to control monetary supply. Mm-hmm. And so I would see them being obsolete in the future, yes.
Okay, got it. And do you think that before then we'll see, one world currencies and global CBDC tokens?
Well, CBDCs, I mean, Europe's going to roll their CBDC out in like 6 months.
Yeah,
so we're going to have CBDCs much sooner. China's already had theirs out, I think, for like 4 years, right? Mm-hmm. Through the BIS, Project Enbridge was created with, I think, 6 nations, and they're creating and changing CBDCs right now. So CBDCs are here. It's not like in the future they'll come. No, they've been here for years. They're coming. The ECB's rolling theirs out here like this next year, right? So no, CBDCs are here. What I'm saying is, just like the dollar took over the reserve standard of the world, from the pound sterling, but the pound sterling is still around today. And so I believe you'll always continue, at least for the foreseeable, century or whatever, where nation states are going to want to try to control their own monetary supply. But what's going to happen is the world is going to need a neutral reserve asset. That's what gold has been. Gold has always been this neutral reserve asset where, back on a gold standard, nations would run their own accounts and then they would settle up in gold from time to time. And gold was that neutral reserve asset, right? And so I believe, what we're seeing right now, which is sort of the rejection of this dollar homogeny, right? Where Russia and China have been trying to de-dollarize since 2013. You have the rise of the BRICS constantly talking about, them trying to create their own currency, things like that. Everybody realizes they don't want to be on the dollar, but what they really don't want is they don't want to be stuck on someone else's system that is constantly being manipulated with zero transparency and is being weaponized against them, right? When Russia had its bank account seized under the Biden administration when they invaded Ukraine, the whole world was put on notice that there's 3 superpowers in the world with nuclear weapons, one of which was Russia. If one of 3 global superpowers in the world with nuclear weapons can have their bank accounts seized, what hope does any other nation in the world have? And that's zero. And so the world is scrambling right now, trying to figure out what can be this next neutral reserve asset that can make the world move forward. And if you think about it, I recently built this house down in Mexico. And as I was building down there, we're importing stuff from Europe and importing stuff from the United States and stuff's coming from Mexico. And I couldn't even get a quote. My appliance people or my builders couldn't even give me a 30-day quote, an invoice, because they don't know what the exchange rate will be. Like, the world cannot continue fighting over money, weaponizing money, having these exchange rates and manipulation that constantly goes forward. And so the only way to move forward back to what brought the entire world to prosperity was having a neutral reserve asset, right? We saw the greatest prosperity the world's ever seen probably through the 1500s in the Renaissance age, when the world operated on a gold coin called the florin. It was the longest lasting gold coin in history, 400 years without being debased. And it allowed this global prosperity to happen. When we had the dollar, global prosperity happened. But right now we're fracturing, we're breaking down. We need a neutral reserve asset. I believe there's only one way forward for the world to have that. And so we sort of have 2 options in front of us right now, right? We have gold and we have Bitcoin. And right now we see central banks are going back to gold in a really big way right now.
Yeah.
I believe in the future it'll probably go to Bitcoin.
Okay. Yeah, that's kind of the way I look at it is I have a little bit of Bitcoin myself too, but I just am like paying attention to what central banks are doing. And it doesn't seem that they've agreed on Bitcoin yet, but they've globally been stockpiling gold. So let me ask you this so we can close it out. If someone's watching this right now and they're starting to realize how fast the world's changing, in 25 years the dollar could no longer be here, there's going to be CBDCs, and hopefully the world agrees on sound money. What should they do to protect themselves in the meantime? What assets should they prioritize? How should they think about gold or Bitcoin and cash and real estate? What would you do if you were starting from scratch today?
Yeah. Well, the beauty is that while we could hope or pray or expect the world to change over this long period of time, where we go back to a gold standard or this Bitcoin standard, whatever that may be, you and I, we can go onto that today. Mm-hmm. So we don't have to wait for the world to move to a gold standard. I can just go on a gold standard. As you said earlier about the cost of a home, I looked it up. It's actually about 500 ounces of gold to buy the medium, 565 ounces of gold to buy the average home in 1971. Mm-hmm. Today it's about 100 to 150. Yeah. So if I would have not used dollars as my reserve standard, but in gold, homes got cheaper for me. In Bitcoin terms, everything's gotten cheaper. And so while most of the world sees the cost of homes getting too expensive and gas getting too expensive and cars getting too expensive, if I priced everything in gold, the world's gotten cheaper for me. If I priced everything in Bitcoin, the world's gotten cheaper for me. So we don't need to wait for 25, 50 years for the world to change. We can change today. So that's number one. We already talked about understanding the unit of account and the measurement, getting off dollars. So that's number two. But what I would say is that I think it's important to understand a couple things. I always tell people never buy an asset unless you understand, one, what is it? Like, what am I buying? Why am I buying it? What am I expecting from it? How does it fit into my portfolio? What am I expecting from it? Over what time frame? What is my thesis for this? You can't borrow conviction from somebody else. So don't buy Bitcoin because you heard someone online tell you to buy Bitcoin. As a matter of fact, a lot of times, if I'm not in the mood for a conversation, if people ask me if they should buy Bitcoin, I just say no. And I say no because what you should do is do the research until the answer to that question becomes obvious to you. And so if I'm buying gold, what am I buying? Why am I buying it? What am I expecting? Over what time frame? What's my thesis? Well, my thesis for gold is that central banks are buying gold. So there's more demand than supply. I do believe that either China or the US is going to revalue gold. And the US might want to preemptively try to beat China to the punch. And there's a decent probable chance, probably not my base case, but a decent probable chance that maybe in the next 10 years we see gold be revalued and it could jump to 10, 15,000 bucks an ounce. I think there's a probability of that happening. Okay, so that's what I think could happen. That's what I'm watching. That's my thesis. Over what time frame? 10 to 15 years. Where will it go to, right? So that's my understanding of that. But for Bitcoin, I have a different thesis. So the way that somebody should move forward is to understand that we have these two things. I can move today, but I have to understand what my thesis is. I have to understand where I think it goes over what time frame, so that then I can allocate around to it. So you see, for example, with Bitcoin, gold has really outperformed Bitcoin this year. Right, it's been doing really, really well. Right now, Bitcoin's down about 31% as of today from its all-time high this year. And a lot of people are like freaking out. Oh my gosh, it's down 31%. What should I do? Should I sell it? Well, I don't know. Why did you buy it? What were you expecting from it? Right? So you should expect it to move over 4-year cycles. And so if your thesis was, well, it never going to go back, it's never going to go down ever again, well, then you're probably disappointed. And so I would say understand those two things. I've sort of laid out what my thesis for both Bitcoin and gold are. Understand what those are, and then you can learn to allocate appropriately. And if you're older, if your time frame is shorter, or you're somebody who's very risk averse and you can't handle the volatility, then you want to buy an asset that has lower volatility. Like gold has been traditionally a much lower volatility asset than Bitcoin has. But if I have a longer time frame, I'm younger, I'm more prone, I like more risk, I like more volatility, then you have Bitcoin. And that's how you kind of decide that for yourself.
Cool. Yeah, and I agree with a lot of things. Like, I remember you said something along the lines of, you can't take $1 million of gold across the border. And part of me wants to disagree with that, because you could, it's small enough, but you'll probably get stopped and they'll probably confiscate it, is the reality. The Bitcoin, that's not going to take place. My thesis for what's coming is that I hopefully, and I'm not planning on leaving the United States, and I don't want to have to, right? There's going to be a whole lot more issues going on, I think, if that's the scenario. So I think.
Well, I mean, let's just talk about that for a second, right? So,
yeah.
What makes a good money? What are the attributes of money? Do you know? I'm sure you do.
Yeah, it's tangibility. It's finite. It's the one where it's fungible. You can. What's the one where you can break it apart?
Divisible.
There's one more I think I missed.
Portable.
Right.
Portable, saleable, right? So gold is fungible. If I get gold in Africa or gold here, gold's gold.
Yeah.
Right? It's divisible. I can melt it down to a gram. I could mix it with steel, right? So it's divisible. It's recognizable. It's durable. Gold will never, tarnish or go away, right? So it's all those things, but it's not very portable.
Yeah.
Right? It's very hard for me to move gold across the country or across the world. And so because of that, that's why gold failed. Right, so gold had to go into the banks to get the velocity that we need. When we lived in a small village, it was fine, right? We move a little bit of gold around. But as the world started expanding, we started moving to transaction times being faster and faster and faster. But the settlement times couldn't keep up.
Yeah.
And so gold had to go into a bank or in somebody's hands to an intermediary to try to get the velocity on top of that. And the problem is that anytime it goes into a bank or into some intermediary, then I have to trust that person not to manipulate it. But of course they always will, because that's human nature. Rand Newmer, he's a big crypto guy. I did a show with him, and his family was from Iran, I believe. And in the 1979, 1980, whatever, when they had the revolution, they had to flee. And his family was being evacuated out to South Africa. That's where he ended up growing up. And his dad had melted down all the gold and had it like in this like kind of like barrel and brought, like the whole family shows up to these evac planes to get evac out. And they're like, hey, what is this? He's like, well, it's my gold. I melted it down. They're like, you can't take that. And he's like, what do you mean? It's our life savings. And they're like, well, you can stay with your life savings. You can get on the plane to go to South Africa. He left the gold. And they went to South Africa, and Rand had to grow up in tents in South Africa because they had no wealth. And so, if you have time to plan for these things, it's great. And I think from an American lens, a lot of times we don't understand how the world works, right? The world, I believe the United States is about 4% of the world's population. But we can't really, but we have the benefit of, I'm in Southern California, like I live in Orange County, we're in the lap of luxury, but we're 4% of the world. 4%. The other 96% of the world doesn't live like us. And so if you're leaving war-torn Syria or Palestine or Africa, like you can't just take your wealth with you. You can't take your land, you can't take your stocks, and you can't take your gold.
Yeah.
And so I also think the world probably becomes a little bit more nomadic in the future. And so having that portability, I think is going to be key.
Yeah, well, that is very, very helpful. And, thanks so much for coming on and explaining all that to me and helping me have a better understanding of why, and that last part really does make a lot of sense to me because, I like to think that maybe things could never get that bad here like they were in Syria where you have to flee, but it's very possible.
But even if it doesn't ever happen here,
Yeah.
even if it doesn't, let's just say that America stays the shine. We never lose our liberty. Whatever happened 100 years ago doesn't happen ever again.
Yeah.
We're still 4% of the world. There's still 96% of the world dealing with this stuff. In North Korea, they're not even allowed to have money. In Afghanistan, a woman can't even have a bank account. You can't send her gold.
Yeah.
You can't send her dollars. You can send her Bitcoin.
Yeah. That makes
And
sense.
so, this is the world that we're in today, and getting gold to her is not going to save her life, and dollars won't save her life because the Taliban has controlled the central bank there. But I can get her Bitcoin, and I can save her life there. People leaving North Korea can take Bitcoin with them as they swim to Hong Kong. They can't swim with their gold. So this is a very real thing in the world. And that's not to say gold is a bad investment. Like I said, I think there's a good probability that gold gets revalued. The U.S. is probably going to try to preempt China. I could see gold getting to $10,000, $15,000 an ounce. That's great. But I don't think it's the future.
Cool. Well, thank you again so much for coming on. And for everyone at home that's watching, thank you all for watching. Mark's YouTube channel is going to be in the video description. And if you care to learn more about what you can do to prepare, Mark has some additional information that will be linked in the video description as well. And as always, if you have any questions for myself or you'd like to learn about making a physical gold or silver purchase, you can call the number on your screen or visit allamericanassets.com. Mark, thanks again for being here.
Yeah, thanks so much.